Hello and welcome to another Tragic Tales of Wrestling. Of course, I'm your host, Tommy Guns, and tonight we are going to do the First Lady of Wrestling, Miss Elizabeth. Now, this topic covers a lady with poise, fashion, everything you want to see in a valet, plus more. The First Lady of Wrestling, Miss Elizabeth again. Before we get into that, I have some news. Our schedule now is that I will be on every other Sunday. And then Tuesdays, we will have the live podcast with me, Ponyboy, and Zero. Zero also has Behind the Mic on Wednesdays, I do believe, and Tantrum Thursdays on Thursday with Ponyboy. All right, so let's get into it. Again, we are doing the tale of Miss Elizabeth, famously known as valet for Macho Man Randy Savage, also famous in WCW for being with Lex Luthor and the controversy that surrounded her death. Now, according to Wikipedia, Miss Elizabeth was born November 19th, 1960. Best known in the professional wrestling circles as Miss Elizabeth, was an American occasional professional wrestler, professional wrestling manager, and professional wrestling TV announcer. She gained international fame from 1985 to 1992 in the World Wrestling Federation, also now known as the WWE, and from 96 to 2000 in the World Championship Wrestling. In her roles as manager to wrestler, Man Randy Savage as well, and other wrestlers of that period. She died as a result of acute toxicity on May 1st, 2003, in her home state of, and it just ends there. Wikipedia edits, people. Now let's get into her early life. Real name Elizabeth Ann Hewlett was born in Frankfort, Kentucky. She graduated from Frankfort County High School and the University of Kentucky with a degree in communications. Now, she started International Championship Wrestling, a really small-known company. She actually started as an announcer, a backstage, behind-the-scenes commentator, and this is before she met Macho Man Randy Savage. While working at the gym, she met Macho Man Randy Savage, also known as Randy Poffo, who wrestled under the ring name Macho Man Randy Savage. They married in December 1984. Now, she premiered in the World Wrestling Federation in 1985. Before my time, but I do remember showcases with Miss Elizabeth and all them. And she before, hold on, sorry, my notes got a little messed up. She was one of the first female lady managers, and because of this, Vince McMahon took interest in Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. On June 17th, 1985, Macho Man Randy Savage debuted in the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the WWF featured an angle in which all the managers in the promotion competed to offer their services to Savage. You had people like Bobby the Brain Heenan, to Brother Love, that were going to be the managers of Macho Man Randy Savage, but he kept, throughout the months and days of this, storyline, he eventually kept saying there's somebody else, we're going to build to this, was the whole storyline. And that's all culminated on July 30th, 1985 in Poughkeepsie, New York. Sorry if I said that wrong. Several managers were ringside in the hope that Savage would consider them as one of their new managers. After a match, Savage thanked the managers for their considerations and then asked his new manager to ringside. An attractive, unnamed woman then came out down to the ring, and announcer Jesse Ventura remarked she must be some sort of movie star, referring to her glamorous looks. It was revealed that her name was Miss Elizabeth, debuting in the WWF on July 30th, 1985, and the episode was aired on the August 24th edition. Now, that's kind of crazy because they had multiple tapings through in WWF back in the day. You would stay at wrestling all day events. I was reading sometimes they'd start at 12 o'clock and they wouldn't end till 7 p.m. So you get 2 tapings out of that, and you'd see matches start off kind of like the regular ring set style with the slow, like promo gimmicky kind of matches, and then you'd build up to something like a Macho Man or Hulk Hogan or even Ric Flair at the time. Back then, wrestling was like amazingly like elongated and fun. You only had things like Saturday Night Main Event, and I mean, you didn't have Raw till 1995, which is, I believe that's correct. Let's double check that up. WWE Raw debut. Now, this is relevant because this is when Randy Savage was a live commentator, and that goes into Miss Elizabeth kind of going away for a while. 1993, correction. I thought it was 95. So as we get into it, like I said, the episode aired on August 24th, 1985, edition of WWF's Primetime Wrestling. Let's look into that. I've never actually heard of that. Let's sidetrack a little bit before we get into the thick of it. WWF Primetime Wrestling was a World Wrestling Federation TV show that aired on the USA Network January 1st, 1985 to January 4th, 1993. So kind of a prerequisite to Monday Night Raw, which is kind of interesting. Okay, I had to look that up for a side note. From that point on, Miss Elizabeth was Randy Savage's manager. On February 8th, 1986, at Boston Garden, she was in the Savage's corner as he defeated Tito Santina for the WWF World Intercontinental Championship. Miss Elizabeth's first angle was during his feud with George the Animal Steele in 1986. In this angle, Steele fell in love with Miss Elizabeth, angering Randy Savage and leading to a series of grudge matches between him and Steele. Their feud was one of the WWF's most popular angles of the 1980s, and it carried 4 more years than it should have. 4 years, thanks to the Feral Steel continuing his innocent crush throughout the years. So they had to go back and forth, is what I'm thinking. Like, this had to be one of those storylines that lasted forever, even through the Steamboat and Macho Man Randy Savage WrestleMania match, which is kind of an interesting thought. That's how long it's segregated, like, to that. Now, if you know anything about George Animal Steele, he used to be this old classic wrestler. I think he believed he started in the 50s and kind of carried on. Near the end, he was kind of more of a comical character. And maybe we'll do a tragic tales of wrestling about him, but I don't think there's anything too tragic about him. To remain to be seen. After injuring Ricky Steamboat, Savage lost his WWF Intercontinental Championship to Steamboat in WrestleMania 3 on March 29th, 1987. Steamboat later lost the title to the Honky Tonk Man, which you remember was one of the longest reigning Intercontinental Champions of all time, only second to Gunther, which is just a recent development. Now Gunther is our world heavyweight champion, and it is amazing. You can hear more of what I have to say about that on the TLC podcast on Tuesday nights. In their match, which aired on Saturday Night Main Event, September 1987, Honky shoved Elizabeth to the mat before assaulting Savage with a guitar. Elizabeth ran backstage and persuaded Hulk Hogan to rescue Savage, running off with his allies, Bret the Hitman Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Throughout the Savage Honky Tonk feud, at key points, Honky Tonk claimed Elizabeth secretly wanted him more than Savage. In several of their matches, Honky Tonk would try to corner Elizabeth, although Savage would always beat him back. In other Savage Honky Tonk matches, a woman named Peggy, usually portrayed by Sherry Martel, which will come up later, or dressed up as Jimmy the Mouth of the South Heart, would harass Elizabeth at ringside, creating the advantage for Honky Tonk. In 1987 Slammy Awards, Honky was named Elizabeth Woman of the Year, but honored her only to harass her and anger Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, this was kind of the time where like the whole Mega Powers thing was starting to boil up and become a thing. Like Hulk Hogan was coming to the ring to assist Randy Savage against Honky Tonk and all that stuff. And it was getting into a point where eventually like there was a build up to them becoming a tag team and like all sorts of different things. Like they were teaming up, they were doing tag matches together. They never won the championships, which I always thought was a weird thing for the Mega Powers. But in February 1988, Hulk Hogan, who had been the champion and the foundation upon which the WWF's popularity was built on, lost the WWF World Championship to Andre the Giant. Andre then sold it to the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Due to an arrangement they had prior, President Jack Tunney declared that the title cannot be forfeit to another individual. A tournament was held at WrestleMania 7 to declare the new champion, which Macho Man Randy Savage won, pinning Ted DiBiase in the finals. Throughout the mid-1988s, Elizabeth accompanied Savage to the ringside for a lengthy series of defense against Ted DiBiase. Now, we're going to get into the Mega Powers, which is kind of the start of the downfall to the Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth marriage, which is very interesting. At an inaugural SummerSlam event in 1988, Savage and Hulk Hogan, dubbed the Mega Powers, teamed up against the Mega Bucks, Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase, with Jesse the Body Ventura. We did a like very long time ago an episode on Jesse the Body Ventura, so be sure to check that out. And most of the pre-match was built up and centered around Miss Elizabeth, who won by time and the peak of her popularity. The tease match was that the thing that got bad for Elizabeth, billed as the secret weapon of the Mega Powers. She was going to wear an itsy bitsy teeny weeny bikini. I really hate how that is phrased on Wikipedia. Under her fancy clothes. Towards the end of the match, Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase were in control, so Elizabeth got on the apron and ripped off her skirt to reveal. And it was like it says panties here. It really wasn't panties. It was more of shorts. You can kind of look on the WWE network or, I mean, YouTube. It's all over the place. But it wasn't really like that. It was very PG for the era. Like they make it sound like way more gross on Wikipedia. And that caused them to actually win the match because of distraction. Elizabeth came the catalyst in an uneasy and ultimate breakup of the Savage-Hogan relationship, particularly due to Hogan's over-friendly and overprotective attitude towards Elizabeth. Now, I agree with CM Punk, which I never really do. If you watch this feud and how it built up to this, Hogan was really handsy with Elizabeth, really overstepping his bounds. Like, of course, Macho Man's going to get jealous. I mean, just look at the clips. You could tell Hogan was kind of moving in on his girl a little bit, but I digress. It's like the weird dichotomy. Do you really think Randy Savage was a heel at this point, or do you not? Shades of gray in early WWE. Kind of interesting, if you ask me. At his behest, Elizabeth accompanied Hogan to ringside for several matches during the fall of 1988, including his match against King Haiku Akeem and Bad News Brown that aired on Saturday Night Main Event. In the match against Akeem, Elizabeth was safely endangered by Akeem and his allies, Slick and Akeem's tag partner Big Boss Man, when they began stalking Miss Elizabeth. During the climactic point of the match, where Hogan was being brutally beaten by Akeem, Big Boss Man grabbed Elizabeth and placed her in handcuffs. Stopped only by Randy Savage, who ran his way out to the ring. Although he checked on Miss Elizabeth's well-being, she appeared more concerned about Hulk Hogan. Now, this is when everything kind of like fell apart for the tag team, like in storyline and everything like that. But behind the scenes, it was falling apart between their marriage, between Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth. Now, this all divulged into like a storyline where Hulk Hogan went against Macho Man Randy Savage. Of course, Macho Man Randy Savage lost because Hulk Hogan, brother. And for a while there, he went with a manager known as Sherry Martel after dumping Miss Elizabeth. For a while there, Randy Savage was more of a heel than ever. You could see shades of it when he started becoming overpossessive with Miss Elizabeth during the Hogan storyline, but it divulged into this where he totally dumped Miss Elizabeth off. And check the comments. We got a couple viewers. How are you guys doing? Now, in March of 1991 at WrestleMania, where she was in the audience for a retirement match between Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior. Savage ultimately lost the match, and his manager at the time, Sherry, began beating and kicking him. Beating and kicking the defeated Macho Man Randy Savage until Elizabeth entered the ring and defended Macho Man. She grabbed Sherry Martel by the hair, throwing her out of the ring. Savage punctuated the reunion by holding down the ring ropes for Miss Elizabeth after years of doing it for him. On June 17th, 1991, during a WWF taping of Superstars, an in-ring segment with Gene Okerlund announcing Savage proposed to Miss Elizabeth, which she accepted. The couple held a heavily promoted on-air wedding, billed as the match made in heaven. In August 1991 at SummerSlam 1991, the couple had a wedding billed as the match made in... The couple actually married in December 30th, 1984. Sorry, that was a weird little snippet that was just thrown in there. But they married on June 17th, 1991 at the WWF Superstar taping. Blah, blah, blah. At the wedding reception, Elizabeth opened the gift package containing a live snake, which frightened the newly turned heel Jake the Snake Roberts and The Undertaker. They crashed the reception. Now, if you know anything about this, this is one of the WWF's, now known as WWE's, weddings that went over without a hitch. Every wedding after that had controversies. Like you have the Billy and Chuck one, the Stephanie and Triple H one most famously, even the Kane and Lita one never panned out. The Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth one was just without a hitch, a full-blown wedding. It was amazing. And then the controversy happened after I was talking about at the wedding reception. Jake the Snake turned heel, giving Macho Man a live snake, which in turn ruined the wedding reception, just caused havoc and everything like that. And remember, Macho Man is retired at this point. In early 1992, WWF champion Ric Flair began to brag that he dated Elizabeth before Savage met her. Flair's tagline was, "She was mine before she was yours," and he showed photos of himself with Elizabeth in casual situations, which were later print issued for the WWF magazine. Oh, the WWF magazine. Fun sidetracked about that is I used to be a subscriber to the WWF magazine, and now known as the WWE magazine and also formerly magazine. But I used to be subscribed to that, and when they actually stopped printing the magazine, I think in 2015, they actually gave me a refund of $9.78. Just a little fun side tangent there. Wow, so I lost my spot. Sorry. It was later revealed that the photos were in fact pictures of Savage and Elizabeth, which Flair doctored, which I always thought was kind of weird. Like, how much money would that actually cost him back in the day? Without Photoshop, without any way to fix it. How do you do that? If you know how to do that in the comments below without Photoshop or anything like that, let me know. Because that is a very interesting thought to me. Flair with Mr. Perfect as executive consultant said that they were going to show new photos of Miss Elizabeth on screen at WrestleMania. Although that does not occur, thank God, nonetheless, Flair claims it set up his WrestleMania match with Savage. Now remember, Savage is coming back from retirement. During this match on April 5th, 1992, Elizabeth made her way to ringside against the wishes of WWF officials. After Savage pinned Flair to win the WWF champion and anger Flair, cornered Miss Elizabeth and forcibly began to kiss her. Elizabeth slapped Flair away, and Savage began beating Flair until ring officials separated him. Now, after this whole storyline and everything like that, Macho Man announced for years, for a while, I think believed up till 1994, for WWE Raw. He eventually left because he still wanted to wrestle. Did not want to be an announcer anymore. He did not want to be a commentator. He felt like he had more in the tank. So in 1995, I do believe, he left the World Wrestling Federation, now known as the World Wrestling Entertainment, to pursue a career in WCW. And of course, Miss Elizabeth followed him, but they were actually divorced at the time. Now, on January 23rd, 1996, Miss Elizabeth returned to the wrestling as a manager for Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan at Clash of Champions. Only 3 weeks later, on February 11th, 1996, Elizabeth turned on Randy Savage by helping Ric Flair, remember, past enemy of Macho Man Randy Savage. And Ric Flair defeated him at Super Brawl and then became Flair's co-manager in the Four Horsemen along with Woman. Woman was Chris Benoit's wife, Nancy Sullivan, later known as Nancy Benoit. There will be a tragic tales of wrestling about that. In September 1996, Elizabeth joined the New World Order alongside Hulk Hogan, was seemed to still deeply care for her ex-husband, and eventually joined his ringside NWO brothers in February 1997. During a match of Randy Savage's in 1997 with Diamond Dallas Page and Kimberly Page, Randy was defeated. In May 1998 at Slamboree, Elizabeth was joined by the NWO Wolfpack, which, remember, was the break-off group of the original NWO Black and White, for those who don't know. In June 1998, she parted ways with Savage once again by joining NWO Hollywood, which was another subsidiary of the NWO. It gets so muddled and ridiculous. There's so many different faction break-off groups, and Miss Elizabeth kind of joined Hulk Hogan's version of it. She then accompanied Eric Bischoff on his way to the ring for the next few months. As she derailed Savage, Savage coolly reminded her that he got her over for a long time and that he did not need her. On January 4th, 1999 episode of Nitro, Elizabeth was seen talking to the police detectives. According to the storyline, she claimed that Goldberg was stalking her and even accosted her by the water cooler. She then filed charges against Goldberg. Goldberg was arrested later that night for aggravated stalking and taken into custody. However, that night, Elizabeth admitted that she was lying, as it turned out Elizabeth was a pawn for the NWO so that Goldberg would be unable to have his scheduled match with Kevin Nash later that night. Due to Goldberg's appearing absent, the returning Hulk Hogan took Goldberg's title shot. Elizabeth remained part of the New World Order until taking a leave of absence from WCW in April 1999. Now, this is what gets leading into her death, leading into her downfall as a person. In a very sad way, it was because of somebody else, not to fully blame, but this starts the management of Lex Luger. In September 1999, Elizabeth returned to the WCW as a manager for Lex Luger. Lex Luger, who was accompanied by Elizabeth all the time to ringside for single matches, was supposed to get ready for a tag team match against Conan and Rey Mysterio Jr. Was Elizabeth's hair on the line? Rey Mysterio Jr.'s and also Rey Mysterio Jr.'s mask at Super Bowl with Kevin Nash as his tag team partner. However, on February 18th, 1999 of WCW's Thunder at the East Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. A limo pulled up and was driven alongside with Rey Mysterio Jr., with Lex Luger and Elizabeth inside. As Elizabeth and Lex Luger were getting out of the limo, Rey Mysterio grabbed the door and slammed it into Lex Luger's biceps, injuring him in the process. Lex Luger was immediately replaced by Scott Hall as Kevin Nash's tag team partner. She then took time off the road to be with Lex Luger during his recovery during his bicep injury. So this was the reason why, like, there wasn't a match between them. That's why Miss Elizabeth Hair wasn't on the line, which was kind of interesting that they would. I mean, think about it. Rey Mysterio's mask versus Miss Elizabeth's hair. Eventually, you see Rey Mysterio unmasked in WCW, which is an interesting thought. You can look at pictures of that online. WWE likes to push that away like it never happened, that you never see his face. But I even had a t-shirt with Rey Mysterio's real face on it. After Lex Luger recovered from his bicep injury, Elizabeth would make her return to WCW programming on the September 27th, 1999 edition of WCW Monday Night Nitro. Towards the end of 1999, Elizabeth became more physical and involved in the action than she ever has been. Her vicious side would be so ever apparent at Starrcade 1999 when she struck Sting with his own baseball bat. Now, this was like something that you've never seen before from Miss Elizabeth. Like, yeah, there were shades of her turning a heel and all that kind of stuff, but eventually she started like totally coming after wrestlers, like showing her vicious side, like messing up matches, interfering with the referee and all that. And it was very interesting to see that full heel turn from Miss Elizabeth. In February 2000, she managed a short-lived partnership between Lex Luger and Ric Flair. The three of them were known as the Team Package. That's a weird name. Shortly thereafter, Team Package went their separate ways as they fought various members of the New Blood. Elizabeth engaged in a short-lived feud with Vince Russo and Kimberly Page. On May 8th, 2000, Elizabeth wrestled in her first official match against Daphne. Now, Daphne, if you remember, was a TNA wrestler who also had a tragic end. And it's interesting to see her career started in WCW in 2000. I never knew that. Let's look into this real quick. It doesn't say her name. Yeah, she held the WCW Cruiserweight Champion. Wow. Well, up until 2001. Daphne has an interesting career. We will have to cover her soon, actually. Elizabeth's final WCW appearance was on May 29th, 2000 edition of WCW Nitro. Elizabeth quietly left the World Championship Wrestling on August 17th, 2000 when her contract expired. She was so when she left, it wasn't a big fanfare. She just kind of retired mildly. She left the business. And this is where we get into her personal life. Elizabeth was briefly married to Clay Lubisky. I cannot say that. Lubisky, a Southern Florida attorney, on December 6, 1997. The wedding was held at a Cuban Hebrew temple in Miami Beach. The marriage was short-lived as the couple soon separated and were officially divorced on April 19th, 1999. Now, during this time, I was watching a video on Age of Wrestling WWE backstories on Miss Elizabeth, and she was actually with Lex Luger and somewhat living with him during this time, which is a very like prerequisite to what's going to happen eventually. But they were living together. This marriage was short-lived because of that, and at the same time, Luger was actually married to somebody. When Elizabeth and Luger left WCW, they stayed together as a couple. After her departure from wrestling, Hewlett began working at a front desk at a Main Event Fitness in Margarita, Georgia, a gym that Luger had owned for years after he was after he and Stephen Bourdain Sting opened it during their wrestling heyday. Interesting, I never knew that. Elizabeth was advertised to make her first wrestling appearance on television since her departure in WCW in the 2000s during the World Wrestling All-Star Tour of Europe in November 2002 and December 2002 along Luger. She was accompanied by Luger on several tours overseas, but did not appear on a single show. Elizabeth never made another wrestling appearance on television after she left WCW. Lex Luger ended up winning and losing the WWA World Heavyweight Championships in matches by Sting. Now, this is where it gets into a darker part, and viewer discretion advised, because we're going to go into things such as physical assault. And if this is too much for you, you can end the podcast here, but it's called Tragic Tales of Wrestling for a reason. On April 19, 2003, Elizabeth was involved in a domestic dispute with Luger, who allegedly struck her in the garage of their townhouse in Marietta, Georgia. Cobb County Police found Elizabeth with 2 bruises under her eyes and a bump on her head, and a cut lip. Luger was charged with misdemeanor count of battery and was released on a $2,500 bond. 2 days later, on April 21st, Luger was arrested for driving under the influence and rear-ending another car while driving his Porsche Accord. According to the reports of the arrest, Luger had slurred his speech and had bloodshot eyes. He could not locate his driver's license, and Luger had a 9mm Luger handgun. Interesting. It might be a little vein there. And Luger handgun for Mr. Luger, huh? Elizabeth was the passenger in the vehicle and was sent home in a taxicab. Luger was also driving with a suspended license for not appearing in court. On March 5, 2003, for a hearing on a previous offense, his driver license was suspended and never renewed after that. Now let's get into the final days of Miss Elizabeth. On May 1st, 2003, in Marietta, Georgia, Luger called 911 to report Hewlett was not breathing. She did not respond for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and the paramedics rushed to her, but she was dead on scene. She was pronounced dead at 42. A medical examiner caused the death as acute toxicity brought on by a mix of vodka and painkillers. Her death was ruled as an accident, and Hewlett was buried in Frankfort Cemetery in Kentucky. Now, some notes I have on the death is the actual mix was a mix of Xanax and alcohol, which causes kidney failure, slowed down heartbeat, and respiratory issues. If you know anything about taking pain pills, it actually slows down your breathing. So what happened is Luger, I guess, like from his storyline, that he went up to make them food and was gone for not more than 10 minutes after microwaving her food. He went to wake her up, and she did not wake up at the time, and she passed in her sleep. Luger tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, calling EMTs and all that, and she ended up passing ultimately due to that mixture. In later years, Luger kind of like got screwed up. At the time too, they raided his house and they found things like more painkillers, steroids, guns that were like not registered or anything like that. And he was arrested on that, and they actually held him for suspicion of homicide. But because they, just ruled it as an accident after finding out what she consumed, after the toxicology report, he was released. Years later, Luger has gone on to be wheelchair bound. He has Parkinson's disease, and he's gone on to state on record that it was one of the most darkest days of his life was with Miss Elizabeth passed. My final thoughts are that Miss Elizabeth graced us with her presence. She was a maverick. She was something new. She was something different. She was the first lady of wrestling, as we described her. There will be none like her, and there have been none ever like her. I like to tell you to go watch her matches. I'd like to tell you to go check out her managerial skills, even check out her stuff in WWA. It's very interesting to see the evolution of Miss Elizabeth throughout the years, and it was very sad. A woman that died at the age of 42, way too young. I've been Tommy Guns. This has been Tragic Tales of Wrestling, the Miss Elizabeth story, the life of the First Lady. Make sure you tune in this Tuesday for the wrestling podcast. Turn in Thursday for Tantrum Thursday with Pony Boy. That's a new one, so I got to keep on track with that. Wednesdays, we have Other Side of the Mic with Zero. And every Sunday, we'll have me, Tommy Guns, with Tragic Tales of Wrestling. Every other week, I should say. So be sure to tune into that. I have a surprise for the next one, and I have a surprise coming up for the holiday season. So be sure to check that out. I've been Tommy Guns for Tables, Ladders, and Chatters podcast. Don't go out there yucking anybody's yum, and have a good day, a good month, and a good year.